Hello, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Millions of people are without power after Hurricane Ida ripped through Louisiana and Mississippi. The Category 4 hurricane made landfall Sunday afternoon along Louisiana's southeastern coast, bringing sustained winds over 100 miles per hour. At least one person died. Ida was downgraded to a tropical storm overnight, but remained dangerous, unleashing heavy rains and flash flooding across the southeast. Louisiana's levee systems, which had been upgraded after Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, largely withstood the storm. Yet the damage to buildings and other infrastructure was catastrophic. Over 5,000 National Guard troops have been activated across Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas to help with search and rescue. The White House says administration officials will travel to survey the damage in the coming days. At a briefing with FEMA and local officials Monday, President Biden pledged the full support of the federal government.
Folks get knocked down, we're there to help you get back on your feet. The most important element, though, is coordinating all the branches of government, state, local, and federal. And that's what we're trying to make sure that we tried to do before this hurricane hit. That's why we've begun working together. We're going to stand with you and the people of the Gulf as long as it takes for you to recover.
For more, let's bring in Nikole Killion, Zeke Miller, and Jeff Stein. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Jeff is a White House economics reporter for the Washington Post. Welcome to all of you. Zeke, back in 2005, the federal response to Hurricane Katrina became a defining moment for the George W. Bush administration. A survey from a month after the hurricane found his approval rating dropped to 42%, the lowest he'd faced to date. Given that, what has the Biden administration done to get ahead of Hurricane Ida?
The Katrina example is a model no president wants to follow, both because of the human cost, but as you mentioned, that political cost to an administration for a bungled federal response from even the very first days of hurricane season earlier this year. The Biden administration was pretty forward thinking about how to message around hurricanes. They wanted the customary briefings that a president sits for at the beginning of hurricane season. But we also heard messages from the White House encouraging people to get vaccinated, so that if they were in the path of a hurricane, they had to take shelter, and leave their homes and evacuate, that they could be protected in somewhere there. And then as this storm developed, the White House has been, even in the midst of the Afghanistan evacuation, very proactive in messaging, putting the president in front of the camera to talk about that storm and its effects, trying to show the president sort of leading and involved in the federal response operation, so that no matter what happened, he wasn't seen to be aloof or detached from the federal response the way that President George W. Bush proved sort of was viewed by the public, having been back in 2005.
Yeah, and it was interesting to watch over the weekend how President Biden visited that FEMA center, was asked a question about Afghanistan, but made it clear he was not there to focus on Afghanistan, that his focus in that moment as the hurricane was coming ashore was on those federal efforts. All right, well, Nikole, let's talk about Afghanistan. U.S. resettlement agencies are preparing to take in tens of thousands of Afghan refugees. Some Republicans criticize the administration for not doing enough to help Afghans. Where do they stand on resettling Afghan citizens who aided American forces inside the U.S.?
Well, there definitely has been a split in the party as far as some members who feel that we should do whatever we can to help those who helped our country. On the other hand, you have some Republicans who do want to know more about the vetting and screening procedures. And certainly against the backdrop of all of this, I think it's important to point out, too, the role that many lawmakers have been playing in, working the phones and trying to get those who are still in Afghanistan back into this country. But as far as those who do have concerns, we've heard, for instance, from senators like Wisconsin's Ron Johnson, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who, for instance, suggested that, yes, we should rescue these refugees, but on the same token, perhaps they should ultimately resettle in a third neutral, safe country. Some lawmakers have also asked that the administration brief them on some of these vetting procedures. We know earlier today at the White House they wouldn't provide an exact breakdown down in terms of the numbers of those, for instance, coming through that special immigrant visa program. However, they have continued to tout the large number of people that they have been able to get out of the country, including Americans, which now tops over 100,000.
And Jeff, you recently wrote that senior officials in Afghanistan's toppled government have warned that parts of the nation's economy are on the brink of devastation. What's behind that, and how does that complicate the Biden administration's potential leverage with the Taliban?
Yeah, for as bad as the last few weeks have been for the country, there are a lot of people who are still inside there who are very, very fearful of what's to come. In particular, it's really worth stressing that Afghanistan's economy is tremendously dependent on foreign aid, and the biggest employer in Afghanistan, the central government, has stopped sending out checks, largely because almost all of that money is from foreign sources. And we saw the Biden administration move to freeze the Afghanistan central bank reserves, preventing them from falling into the hands of the Taliban. But that means that the Afghanistan economic situation could get really scary, and we're already hearing reports of fears of a refugee crisis, a humanitarian crisis. The banks have been suspended. People have not been able to withdraw money from the ATMs. But if that happens, we could see a run on banks. It could sort of be, a great recession plus a financial crisis plus a military and political crisis all rolled into one. And this story could stay in the headlines and could really mean a lot of trouble for a lot of people if humanitarian, international, and U.S. aid is completely cut off, which is certainly looking like the case, or at least plausible outcome right now.
Well, Zeke, now that the last U.S. troops are out of Afghanistan, what are officials saying about the potential for additional attacks at Kabul's airport?
There's certainly a lot of concerns still. In Kabul, the top U.S. general in the region, General McKenzie from Central Command, told reporters that there are significant doubts within the U.S. government that the Taliban can hold and keep the peace in Kabul and maintain security there, in part because of that threat from ISIS-K, like we saw take the lives of the American service members last week. They're sworn enemies of the Taliban, and because in part the Taliban let out hundreds, if not thousands, of ISIS-K fighters in recent weeks as it swept through the country, that the Taliban could have its own problem, with sort of homegrown terrorism problem on its hands in the coming weeks. That created a very dangerous situation for Americans and others left behind in Kabul and the rest of Afghanistan, as well as for Afghan civilians, both in terms of whatever the Taliban will do now that it has complete control of that country, but also what ISIS-K will do in an attempt to destabilize that new government there. So it's a perilous time there, and a lot of concern in the United States for what that will look like in the days, weeks, and months ahead.
Let's turn to domestic issues. Nikole, a month ago, progressive lawmakers camped out at the U.S. Capitol to protest the end of a federal ban on evictions. Last week, the Supreme Court overturned the CDC's new moratorium. Are members of Congress doing anything about that?
Well, we have heard from many of those progressives. Late last week, they issued a letter to Democratic leadership, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer, demanding immediate congressional action on this issue because, as you know, in that latest Supreme Court ruling, it pretty much said only Congress at this point can authorize any type of extension. And so to that extent, that is what these progressives are calling for. However, Speaker Pelosi at this point has not indicated any plans to bring Congress back. Right now, the House is due to resume on September 20th, the Senate September 13th. So at this point, we're not expecting Congress to reconvene. At this point, certainly things are fluid and could always change. But short of that, what we are seeing are, lawmakers and the administration try to find other workarounds. So, for instance, Speaker Pelosi has said, they are looking at other legislative remedies. You also have the administration, which just today issued directive, the Attorney General issued a letter to members of the legal community asking them to try to work with tenants and landlords to deal with this crisis, including, law schools, legal, students and clinics and the like, to try to find some resolution for those who may be potentially going through the eviction process. And then also, there has been a strong push both from the administration and from lawmakers to try to get more of this emergency rental assistance out of the door. We're talking about $46 billion, and only about 10-11% of that has actually gone out. So we do know that, again, lawmakers in the administration in particular are trying to work more closely with states and localities to try to get that aid out the door to help those who may need it to avoid being evicted.
Jeff, on the issue of federal oversight, you report that the Biden administration is trying to bring down unusually high fuel prices by regulating anti-competitive business practices. What are they doing, and how is Hurricane Ida impacting those efforts?
It's a really good question, and I wish I had a better answer for you. The FTC told the White House in a memo obtained by us and other news agencies last week that they would basically be looking at anti-competitive behavior, both at sort of the distributor level and the retail level, that there's fear and concern among the antitrust crusaders that Biden has tapped to lead the FTC and other regulatory agencies, that some of these big firms are implicitly or actively colluding to keep prices high. A lot of the experts I've talked to in this area are very skeptical of the White House claims in this regard. And internationally, prices have increased as demand has surged in the aftermath of the pandemic. We've seen many calls for OPEC to increase production. We'll see. Maybe there's something they can do, in terms of pressuring some of these big firms to lower prices. And there's been a particular concern about a potential merger that's going through right now between 7-Eleven and Speedway that a lot of people fear could lead to localized, in particular, price increases. But whether that would, lead to short-term relief for people who are seeing, really, we saw 2% increases in consecutive months in gas prices, which may not sound like a lot, but annualized over the course of the year would amount to a 20% increase in gas prices. That's a lot of money for families who are on tight budgets, and commuter costs amount to a big percentage of them. And it's really unclear if this antitrust push will unravel that or really make inroads.
Right, but fuel prices is certainly something a lot of Americans pay very close attention to. Nikole Killion, Zeke Miller, and Jeff Stein, thank you all very much.